So going into this session is now Stephanie McIsaac, who I see is there. Hey, Steph, who's the Senior VP and Practice Leader for Environics Analytics. She's going to talk to you about the specific kind of data that Environics is collecting. A lot of their work is with us at CUI around Bring Back Main Streets and what the actual retail composition looks like. And so she's got some really good stuff. So hang on to your hat, all you data geeks, another 30 minutes of it, and then we're on a break. Over to you, Stephanie.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen here, and we can jump right into it. So here we go. Okay, so it's a very perfect segue into this conversation. So I'm going to start with just giving you a little bit of an overview of who Environics Analytics is, and then we'll dive into some really interesting findings. So to start it off, and let me just minimize my screen. There we go. So who are we? Who is Environics Analytics for those of you who maybe have not worked with us or heard of us? We were founded in 2003. We have clients across every sector. We work very closely with the CUI, and I'm very excited to continue to do that work with other tourism and VIA organizations. We are a team of geographers and mathematicians. We are a team of analysts. We often refer to ourselves as geeks. So please do not feel afraid to ask any very geeky questions. Those often get us the most excited. But at the highest level, what do? We provide data that speaks to or helps you speak to understanding the demographics, lifestyle types, behaviors of consumers or people who live within an area of interest. We're able to help understand who lives there, what they do, what they shop, how they consume media, and we can do this at a postal code level across the country. We do work with clients in almost every sector, and regardless of where they are in their analytical roadmap. We have over 30,000 key data points, and I know that number is large. But what we do is we really help decision makers use data to inform those decisions. We primarily focus on helping make decisions around real estate or marketing applications. So, for example, helping with placemaking activities, event marketing, programming. We also help with retail site selection or doing some business analyses, which is something that we're starting to do with BIAs so that they can get a sense of which type of tenants they should be marketing to. Everything that we do is privacy compliant. We do offer a software as well. I'm not going to get into that today. But what's really important is to understand that our data is built from the ground up. So we have this information at a very granular level down to the postal code. And we have partnerships that allow our clients to really action this in the media ecosystem, whether it be a traditional media application such as direct mail or in the digital space as well. And obviously this has been something that's been very helpful as our clients are recovering from this pandemic. We also have experience directly, hopefully a lot of you are in the room as well, but we do work with a number of BIAs, tourism organizations, or travel sectors. So today, I'm really going to be helping dive into the local visitor or domestic travelers. We know that for BIAs or tourism areas, there are three distinct groups of people that are of interest to them. There are the local visitors, the people who live or work within the area. Those people are likely that foot traffic, the pedestrian traffic who are interacting with businesses within BIA boundaries. There's also infrequent domestic travelers, which is a population that is definitely of more interest nowadays with international travel still being restricted. So those are people who are traveling from further distances, either from within the same province or from other provinces within the country. And then lastly, the international tourism. That would include people who are staying here for longer durations and overnight visits. Now, we are also going to speak to you, or I'm also going to speak to you today using mobile movement data. Our mobile movement data, we call Mobilescapes. It's the product that we've built that leverages multiple sources of mobile data that is out there so that we could get a sample size that allows us to weight the sample to the general population. And obviously that's a very important factor when we're talking about not only volumetrics, but when we want to connect this data down to the who. Once we can understand who is visiting where, we can then start to understand why. So a little bit of the geekiness is going to come out here, but it is important that you understand a little bit more about what this data or how this data was created before I jump into the findings. So as I mentioned, Mobilescapes is our permission-based mobile movement data product. It's based on apps or SDKs where we're capturing that geographic location of the device in order for us to infer where that device is likely to reside or to work. Once we can get that information, we're then able to weight it up to the general population 15 plus within those areas to get that, that very robust sample that we can use in all of our studies. Once we get that, where the postal code of where that device is likely to work or reside, we're then able to attach it to all of those other data products that I had mentioned that allow us to really understand the demographics, the expenditures, or any other behaviors that we're looking at analyzing. This information also allows us, which is something that has become very, very important through the pandemic recovery, to monitor changes over time. So this data we can get down to any time frame of interest dating back to 2018. So we can look at month over month, year over year, day over day. This has been something that we really worked with a lot of BIAs to use so that they could understand the impact of programs that they've created or completed within their BIA boundary and what those populations attending that event looks like compared to the other visitors that they're observing. So let's get into it. How has COVID-19 actually impacted BIAs in surrounding areas, and how does this differ regionally? Now, I do need to stop for one moment and talk about that international visitor. So we know international visitorship is down, not surprising. In 2019, we can see that there were a total of 7.5 million trips made to Canada from international visitors, and this dropped significantly down to only 650,000 in 2021. So because of this reason, for the study today, I am really focusing only on domestic travelers, and this will allow us to get into some of the detail. So what does this mean for BIAs? What you're looking at here is a view from our footfall product, which uses that Mobilescapes data, and it allows us to get a sense of who has walked through a BIA within Canada. So we have geofence, which is a fancy word for saying drawing a boundary around any BIA, every BIA in Canada. And this here is aggregating the counts up at a Canadian level or national level. We can see that the trend from January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2020 is that BIA traffic is down. At a high level, we see that it has improved in 2021, but I'm going to show you that that story is not consistent regionally or down at an individual BIA level. So overall, we can see the obvious decline in March 2020 when the pandemic came into play. And you can see that it was there were increases and decreases over time while restrictions were changing. In 2019, BIAs across Canada saw a total of 5 billion visits, or 94 million in an average week. This dropped by 42% in 2020, down to 2.8 billion from 5. In 2021, overall BIAs did see an increase of 14%, so up to 3.2 from 2.8 the year prior, but there's still an overall decrease of 35% compared to 2019. When we look at this at a provincial view, we see that the trend is similar in Alberta and Ontario. However, we do start to see some differences here.
Steph, can you just slow down a little bit, please? Everybody is mesmerized. They just need to speak a little slower.
Yes, thank you for that reminder.
Okay.
Yes, we do see that the trend in Alberta and Ontario is similar to national, but we start to see some differences here. And I am going to peel it back from here as well and go into a few individual BIAs. What's interesting to us is that there is a similar trend, but the decreases are happening at different times. So not a surprise, I'm sure, to anybody on this call, the summer months see the largest traffic. Alberta does see a few other spikes, those stars that you're seeing, and I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the stars here we've put at the second week of July, which is at the Stampede. So Alberta BIAs do benefit from that inter or intra-provincial tourism. When we look at the actual numbers, we see that neither Alberta or Ontario have returned to 2019, but both show an improvement in 2021 compared to 2020. So in 2020, Ontario BIAs experienced a 45% decline from 2019. And in 2021, they are still seeing 36% fewer visits than 2019. However, in 2021, they did see a lift from 1.4 billion to 1.6 billion. It's a similar story in Alberta, where 2021 looks promising compared to 2020, but still significantly fewer visits compared to 2019. Now, using our MobileScapes data, because it is built at that granular level and we have those geofences created, we're able to start looking at this in different aggregations. So what you're looking at here are 4 specific BIA associations, one in Montreal, one in Hamilton, one in Ottawa, and the Toronto Association of BIAs. And the story starts to get interesting. So of these 4 that we analyzed, we know that Toronto does a significant amount of volume compared to the others. In 2019, the Toronto Association of BIAs observed 1.7 million visits compared to Montreal, who observed 625,000 visits. That's the next largest of these 4. The volume shouldn't skew the findings because it is interesting to see how each of them are starting to rebound. Hamilton Association of BIAs is showing signs of quickly rebounding. Their visits dropped by 41% in 2020, but last year they only saw 32% fewer than 2019. The opposite side of this, however, is Ottawa. They're not yet rebounding. The Ottawa Coalition of Business Improvement Areas, BIAs, observed 45% fewer visits in both 2020 and 2019. They did not rebound last year compared to some of the others. The Toronto BIA Association saw 47% fewer visits in 2020, but only 40% fewer visits in 2021. So they are showing signs of improvement. We wanted to dive a little bit deeper to see if that story is the same at an individual BIA level. We selected 4 BIAs to focus on today, but we could do this for any BIA or boundary across the country. While each of these 4 urban center BIAs experienced larger declines in 2020 than the national and provincial averages, we see that they haven't all been impacted the same. The downtown Vancouver BIA and downtown Halifax BIA saw an increase in visitation in 2021 compared to 2020. However, the other 2 did not. Downtown Vancouver BIA saw 59 million visits, which is $3 million more, $3 million, not dollars, $3 million more in 2020, but that's still 31 million fewer than they did in 2019. So they're showing signs of improvement, but they're still not at that 2019 number, which I don't think any of us are surprised of. What is also interesting to us here is that both the Toronto Financial District and the Ottawa Bank Street BIA 2021 rates were not only less than what they were in 2019, but also fewer than 2020. Of these 4, the Toronto Financial District has been impacted the most. 61% less visits in 2020 compared to 2019, and 62% fewer in 2021. We wanted to dive into this to see if we could better understand why they're still seeing a decline and what might be driving this. What you're looking at now is a map of Toronto. The colors indicate how likely populations from those neighborhoods are to be leaving their home. We know that BIA visitation is a result of the population's ability to use the member businesses, whether it be for work or for pleasure. And our Out and About product, which is also created from that mobile movement data, allows us to understand trip purposes. Why are people leaving their home and how has this shifted over time? The darker purple areas on this map are areas with higher rates of people leaving their home from December 2019. This here is the same data for December of 2020. You're able to see a very dramatic difference when compared to the prior. And it allows you to understand which neighborhoods are experience less, what we say, out and aboutiveness. So people are leaving their houses at a lower rate than they were before. When we compare last December 2020 to the December of 2021, we do see that things are starting to improve. But we know that people are still working from home. So we wanted to get a sense of why people are now more likely to leave their home than they were in December of 2020, but are not yet at the rate they were leaving in 2019. We can now bring in the who. So on this slide, what you're looking at is our PRISM segmentation system. The PRISM segments with the highest rates of leaving their home in December of 2021. For those of you who might not have used PRISM before, PRISM is the leading segmentation system that allows our clients to understand customers, population, and markets. It classifies every postal code in Canada into one of 67 lifestyle types, which are differentiated by socioeconomic status indicators, demographics, and behaviors. The PRISM icons on this slide already tell us a lot of information. The number speaks to the socioeconomic status, with 1 being the most affluent Canadians. The color of the icon speaks to the urbanity type, red being urban and yellow being suburban. For purposes of today's presentation, we've created 3 simple groups: the wealthy, mature family and empty nesters, downscale, young, urban singles and couples, and mid-scale, diverse, large families. These 3 groups are showing differences in why they're leaving their home from one another and from the Toronto average. The wealthy, mature family segment is more likely to be leaving their home for purposes of using green spaces or parks within the city, whereas the downscale young singles and couples are leaving for commercial or shopping purposes. We also know that a lot of them are likely working where they're going. We can do the same analysis focusing on Ottawa, and we see a similar story. What you're looking at here is pre-pandemic. What rates were people leaving their homes? It's a smaller scale, a less dramatic change than what we observed in Toronto, but we do see a decline. 19% fewer people were leaving their home in Ottawa in December 2020 compared to 25% in Toronto. Similar story here as well, but the trip purpose is where it gets important. We saw a similar thing when we were looking at the Ottawa market, with upscale mature groups likely visiting their home now at higher rates for purposes of visiting a park or a green space. This is consistent with what we saw in Toronto. Another lens we can layer is workplace population. So what you're looking at here is a map in December 2019, where neighborhoods were experiencing the highest rate of people at work. It's the opposite of what we were just looking at, where people were leaving their homes. We're now showing you where people are going to work. Many BIAs, including the Toronto BIA Association, which experienced the greatest decline in traffic from what we've looked at today, rely heavily on workplace populations. This allows you to evaluate not only the workplace presence within your BIA boundary, but also surrounding, who might be using your services on a daily basis. When we compare the December 2019 to Ottawa 2020, we do see differences in where people are going to work. 40% fewer people were seen working in Toronto in October 2020 than in December 2019. That's a significant impact on what BIAs might be expecting from a visitation perspective. We can then compare that to October of 2021. So although we were observing that people were back to leaving their homes at similar rates to 2019, we know that they're not leaving their homes for purposes of going to work at this time. It's going to be interesting to monitor this on an ongoing basis. So I know I went very quickly. I was very excited to show you some of the findings and wanted to make sure that we were able to make it through all of them. But what did we learn? So to start, we see that not all BIAs across Canada have experienced the same pattern of rebound. We know that all experienced a drop from 2019. Some are continuing to decrease in 2020, whereas others started to rebound. We also know that not all lifestyle types are leaving their homes at the same rate. Those who might have visited your BIA in the past for purposes of work may no longer be having to return to work. What does that mean? The people who are likely to be using your BIAs now may be similar people, but the reasons for their trips have likely changed. We also see that the workplace-bound travel has not yet returned to the 2019 value, which means the frequency of visits have likely decreased as well. So I know we're going to have time for questions, and I do welcome them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Before I drop, Tanisha Nathu is also within the chat. She's our BIA expert. So if there is any question that I'm unable to cover today, we'll definitely be in touch and connect after.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's great. It's been great to have you here and great for us to have a chance to see it. Some of the questions that you're getting, I mean, there's a lot of data there and people want to pour more into it. I should just say that Environics has been working with CUI on the rollout of My Main Street, which is this, which Mayor Sohi mentioned as well, which is a pilot in Southern Ontario funded by the Government of Canada to support Main Street recovery. Two sides of it, the Economic Developer Council of Ontario doing, creating ambassadors for Main Streets, and then us doing some community activation, and then this data that we've been collecting with you. So we're learning a ton, right? And I think you're getting asked a bunch of questions in the chat here about, for instance, if you were to, how far back does your data go? That's one question people are asking. How far actually back have you been tracking?
We have the mobile movement data back to 2018.
Okay. Okay. And are there limitations from your point of view in terms of, are there things that it can't tell us that we want? So for instance, could it be even scaled back to go even to smaller communities? Is it available? I don't know, you can see somebody's asked a question here in the chat. Could it be available for a very small community? What do you think?
Yes, yes. I love the question of what can it not do? I am the same type of person when I ask questions. So it is available at a postal code level, which means that we're able to draw a boundary around any area and pull the data at that postal code level. Mm-hmm. What it cannot do is it cannot speak to dwell time. So we aren't able to let you know the average duration of a visit. Mm-hmm. And that's just due to the data availability and the importance of being privacy compliant. But we are able to talk to how frequently people are visiting. So we can determine, and we were starting to go down that path, who is visiting more frequently than in the past. Mm-hmm. Who was visiting for 3 days in a year versus 10 days in a year. Mm-hmm. So we are able to do that at a very granular level.
Mm-hmm. And another question, is the data only for Canadian cities, Stephanie, or do we have it can we compare it to American cities or other cities around the world?
We can absolutely compare it to the states, the American cities. We do have similar data for the US. We mm-hmm. can also speak to where international visitors are coming from into Canada. Mm-hmm. So I touched only briefly on overnight visitors or overnight trips. But mm-hmm. we can also tell you the countries where those trips are originating from.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the challenges we've got is, how do we know what factors have contributed to a change, right? So for instance, as Mark's asking in the question here, is it bike lanes? Is it curbside patios? Is it fewer cars? You know what I mean? Like the thing mm-hmm. that's puzzling about this is that we've had great reductions in transit. So we know that people are having, and actually it was mentioned in the earlier session that in the case of some of the Canadian downtowns, you can walk there. So if mm-hmm. you weren't taking transit, you could still walk in. So is there any way to be able to, for you folks in as you're doing it, to say, I mean, you saw other people in the chat saying, oh, that was the Christmas holiday, that was summer holidays. Any other kinds of ways that you can spot certain contributors?
Yes, so that's why we place such emphasis on the who. Once you understand who is visiting, who is not visiting, who is visiting more frequently than others, we're able to get a sense of their behaviors, of their opinions, of the more softer attributes that we could then get a sense of what might be driving that change in behavior. And
suppose maybe they're walking less of a distance. So I might be leaving my home, but I'm actually not going as far, right? So in the before time, I might have elected to get in my car and go into a whole different shopping district. But in the now time, I don't get in my car. I actually get out and I walk. So are there ways for us to track that to see the trip length is shorter?
Yes, of course. Yes, we're able to track the distance between who is coming. And if you can think back in my presentation when I was showing the dots going to the financial district, we're doing exactly that. we're measuring the distance of where a person originated from versus where they were then observed.
I'm noticing that one of our listeners who's coming in from overseas is saying that in Rio de Janeiro, they're actually looking at energy consumption. And I know there are other clues that we can derive to tell whether people are home more. So for instance, it'd be interesting to do see whether our utility bills are higher. I'm assuming they are, right? They must be, because we're home more, but I don't know whether or not that's been offset by the fact that we're not using the same utilities in the office we used to go to. Anyway, I'm wondering do you have an opportunity to talk to you? I mean, you did warn us, Data Geeks, and I did warn them, and you've lived up to that billing, just saying. But are there other kinds of overlays? Sorry, I just hit my mic. There may be other kinds of overlays that people might be interested in seeing, energy. What are the impacts in terms of, we heard anecdotally, there was an air quality improvement, for instance, when we weren't going so many places, right? Have you looked at that about or do you have questions that you'd love to be asking and getting answers to?
Yeah. So we don't have data on those metrics, but the who and those more subjective pieces are where we find it very interesting when we're able to layer in when other organizations have those factors, and we can get a sense of pairing that data. When do we have data that tell us a lifestyle type's propensity to be interested in moving to an electric vehicle, and if we pair that with what we know about some of their shopping behaviors or their consumption behaviors, you're able to get a sense of prioritizing what's important to the people who you're seeing more frequently.
Again, because we'd like to be able to determine. So it could be, I mean, I saw the categories you had, but there are all sorts of other ways to bisect it. So is it not just by age? Could it also be by gender? Is it also by race? Do you have it by race? Do you have it by different kinds of, because we know that people's comfort levels of being actually outside of their own space vary considerably. And that's part of what we'll be talking about over the next couple of days is public safety, community safety, and who feels safe going out at the moment. So I'm wondering if can you get it at that level? Again, I think what I hear you saying is you're receptive to other data sets. So if there are other folks here that have access to data sets and ideas for you, and I appreciate that your colleague Tanisha's on here, maybe they could start to think about, isn't it called mashups? I think it's called mashups when you combine different sets, right?
Yes. We do also have in our demographic data, we do have all of those demographic indicators down to that same postal code level. So if there was a certain group of population that you were looking at identifying and then better understanding that subset's behavior, that's something that we do often and we can absolutely help with. Because we have everything down to that postal code level, we're then able to infer the people within that postal code and attach to it all the other behaviors that we understand.
And again, at the BIA level, I mean, Lauren Cutler's pointing this out in the chat that, not all BIAs are the same, and so, and that's true because they, we've got ones that are, their area is predominantly commercial office, and then we've got others that are more suburban and they're more distributed and they don't have offices. So it's all quite different. But I think this is part of the tool for us to be able to identify and then be able to extract as best we can what our actual understanding is. What do you think is the next step for you in terms of continuing to do this work? Do you want to do more? Would you like to collect more local data and have more opportunities to be able to learn from the local experience and then continue to, because I think part of what we're going to try to make the case of, and I see someone has suggested here, it might be Mark, has suggested here that this is part of our case to the federal government, say that they need to invest specifically in downtowns and main streets in a particular kind of way, because the data is showing us how people are behaving in these local communities, eh?
I think that's exactly it. That's exactly our next step is we're really trying to help use data to make decisions. Looking at volumetrics or focusing on the big cities as we've often done in the past, we're seeing that there's so many differences down to that nuanced level that we want to make sure that decisions are being made based on the data so that the results can be as impactful as possible. Yeah,
so people need to hear this. We need all hands on deck thinking about this, because to make public policy work at that granular level is really tough. If you're saying postal code, census tract, postal code, that's a very specific area. So what's going to work in Yaletown is different than what will work. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking time, Stephanie, to give us a sense of this. As everybody knows, we're going to post all this online. You'll be able to learn tons more about this. And it's only the beginning. This is an ongoing data collection that we're doing. And we appreciate Stephanie coming on and all your folks at Environics Analytics. Thanks for joining us. Good news, guys, 15-minute break. Listen to that playlist. Come on back. We're going to talk about housing and bringing people back. And what is it going to take? Housing. It's going to take housing, transit, a bunch of other things. Housing is first. Really good session. Francis Bueller from the Globe hosting, and then a number of different perspectives from across the country and different ways of looking at this about how does housing bring back downtown. See you in 15 minutes. Listen to some music in the meantime.